Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, we are going to sit down and talk with University of Missouri Assistant Professor of Clinical Family and Community Medicine and Assistant Professor of Orthopedic Surgery, Dr. Aaron Gray. Guys, we are going to talk about ACL injury reduction, and this is an absolute doozy. Dr. Gray is going to share with us where his idea for ACL injury risk evaluation came from and why it's pertinent, what he's looking at and why it's important. And it's really neat stuff. He's going to get into what the test is and how it can be implemented and where it came from. It's really a fascinating idea. It's super cool. I think it's absolutely genius because it's quick, it's simple, the results are fast, and it's all associated with a video game. It's really cool. I think you guys are going to like what he's doing. He's going to talk about how it works, with the world of training. And then we get into what step 2 and 3 is when it comes to his evaluation. And we're going to get into it with both training and the research end of it. We're going to talk about what other things should be looked at, what other issues should be evaluated when we're looking to evaluate the risk of ACL injuries and where this project could lead and the directions that it could go in. And that's the stuff to me that I think is really cool. And Dr. Gray really just opens up and, talks about where he's hoping that this whole thing is going, which is really, really neat to me. We then get into how evaluations can improve communication between not just strength and conditioning and sports medicine and then your orthopedic surgeons and physical therapists, but also including the athletes in there, which is, the most important thing whenever you're looking at any of these tests, evaluations, monitoring, whatever you want to call it, how can it drive communication is always the key factor. And then we finish out talking about other evaluations that could contribute to return to play. And I think that this is where all of us in the field of strength and conditioning really look and we say, we get to these certain points, but we don't really know where to go next or how we can make sure these kids are ready to go back into athletics, into competition after they've been hurt. And we finish off talking about that. It's Dr. Gray is awesome, and I got to give a shout out to Dr. Brian Mann. He hooked this up, and when Dr. Mann says, "Hey Jay, you need to talk to this person," I'm ready to go that day, that minute, whenever it is. So thank you, Dr. Gray, for taking the time. Thank you, Dr. Mann, for hooking it up. I think the conversation was awesome. I really took a lot home from it. I hope you guys enjoyed the talk as much as I did. Let's get right to it. Dr. Gray, thanks for being on with us today.
Absolutely. Glad to join you.
Brilliant. Well, you're out there in Mizzou, and the first thing that Dr. Mann said that we needed to talk about was to get talking about ACL injuries and what we can do around those. So let's start there and work our way forward.
Yeah, so I became interested in preventing or looking at prevention of ACL injuries, and specifically in female athletes. I guess a few years ago. And how it started is I was at some national sports medicine meeting and heard Tim Hewitt and Greg Meyer kind of talk about a lot of their research and their approach on ACL injury prevention. And I was at home playing. I had recently got an Xbox that had the Kinect motion sensor with it, and was like screwing around on some ping pong or sports game or something. And I realized that wow, this is actually pretty accurate. Like when I move my knees in and out, since in knee valgus or varus, like this actually seems to measure it. And so, because I had heard some of these national lectures from Tim Hewitt, talking about a knee valgus angle with athletes, specifically female athletes, after a drop vertical jump, and how that was those girls that tore their ACLs, they had increased angles of knee valgus, and I was like, I wonder if we could actually work to build on what they've done in the lab and try to create something where we can take this out to the field, take it out to high school physicals, take it to gyms and work on it. So something that we've been working on over the last 3 or 4 years, and I've partnered with some professors in computer engineering and computer science, and so we've built out some software where we've been able to go out to high schools and measure athletes, and kind of identify those that have increased knee valgus angles whenever they first land. And that's that typical, if you've ever watched a junior high girls basketball game and you see everybody out there and they're all jumping and their knees cave in together and almost touch, it's that same kind of risky pattern. And so, what our hope with that is that we can, we're still kind of in the pilot phase, but that we can identify athletes that are at higher risk and then really, get them on targeted, kind of personalized injury prevention programs.
Well, that's neat. So then the software then I'm guessing is almost like Dartfish in a way.
Yeah, so the cool thing is that so since we're using the Microsoft Connect motion sensor, and then our kind of our computer science people here have developed their own software to kind of improve on the natural stuff that the joint centers that Microsoft gives you, and so we're able to get like immediate angles, like as soon as it's done, the number pops up. So there's no post processing, and that's your thing with a lot of technologies, where you have to go back and you've got to get your mouse and you've got to click on the joints in every frame and draw the lines or something. Like this recognizes where the hip and the knee and the ankle is, and it gives you that number right away.
So wait, so you're actually using like the video game console.
So we use the Microsoft Connect, like the exact one that you'd play with your video game. We use that motion sensor that most people would set in front of their TV to play their video game. We use that exact same thing. We put it on a tripod, hook it up to a computer, and you can get on a foot tall box, drop off, and jump as high as you can, like you're getting a basketball rebound. And then we can give you, within 2 seconds afterwards, we're able to give you something that we call the knee to ankle separation ratio, which kind of measures the distance between the knees compared to the distance between the ankles, which gives you kind of very good estimate on knee valgus angle. We're able to give you that right away, and so you could literally have somebody do it, and then 5 seconds later, you could start talking to them about their specialized program.
Awesome. So then what is the next step after that then? So you guys run through your test and you do these things, and then what exactly are you doing post? So we have your X versus Y. We have that ratio. So now what are we going to do? How are we prescribing? What are we looking at? And then what's the retest? Are we just going back and doing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, so this is kind of still, this was kind of our pilot phase to kind of prove the point that okay, can we build this? Can we measure? And this is one measure, and so I'm not going to pretend to say that you can accurately prevent all ACLs with just one measure. I mean, I think that there's multiple, obviously, there's multiple risk factors. There's core weakness. There's single leg dominance. There's different kind of things, and so this is kind of the first test that we've built, and so we're currently trying to get funding to build other tests, and so it would be like a small suite of tests, basically 4 or 5 different kind of motions that you would do, and then you'd be able to get a much more accurate picture as far as kind of more detailed risk factors. And so, what our current plan with this is we measured, I think, 170 something high school athletes over this past year at their different physicals or with teams. And it was really impressive. We have a nice kind of like bimodal. There's like kind of 2 humps as far as if you look at everyone, and that those 2 humps is the males and females. And so it was really, really cool just to show that, wow, I mean, we all know that, there's that difference from previous research, but our technology was able to show that, really good. And so, right now we're not intervening. We're still just kind of following everybody, and we're going to follow them all up to a year and see who tore their ACL and who didn't. But in the future, as we can build out more tests, then once if you saw somebody like, hey, you have a lot of knee valgus, like we really have to work on your hip external rotation, your hip abduction, and your core strength. Then we would, work on those strengthening programs. And then, yeah, then if you could retest people, at 3 months, 6 months afterwards, you could potentially show that your injury prevention program is actually, your strengthening program is actually having real effects on how people dynamically move.
That's awesome, man. We actually talked with Mike from Sparta, and we were talking about using these sort of things as gosh, what was the word that he used? And just basically, this is just the diagnostic to allow you to decide what you're actually going to do. So you could look at it and determine as the physician or the coach what methods you deem or means you deem most appropriate to help assist this athlete in their health and continue to improve that way. That's pretty awesome. And it would almost be really like It would be neater, like if you guys are able to, and because you're dealing with student athletes, I'm sure that this is hard and you need to go through a bunch of paperwork, but you're in academia, so that's probably easier for you to do than for coaches to do. But to almost like keep all of that, like what Brian Mann does with soccer at Mizzou versus what Jay DeMayo does with basketball at Richmond versus what Dan Raimondi does with women's lacrosse at George Washington, and just start looking, and then maybe actually not just knowing like, oh, hey, we have to have strong hip adductors, and we have to make sure that the ankle complex moves right, and firing timing, and all four walls of the core, and blah blah blah, all the things we talk about. But now it's like, well, they did the single leg hip bridge and they didn't, and they were all right. They double leg squatted and they didn't, and they were all right. So now correlation doesn't necessarily prove causation, and we all know that. But it would be really cool to be able to just, because it doesn't seem like this is hard to do. I mean, it's basically like setting up for your old bad prom pictures. You just put it up on the tripod and say, "Hey, go cheese," and then you have the numbers, and that's really fascinating to me. And you could have hundreds of programs, not just subjects of actual programs, and you could look and be like, what are the commonalities where there were issues later? I mean, like, even like, what if tendinitises show up in specific things? You know what I mean? Like, that could be like, that's like super cool.
Yeah, I mean, because we're really, trying to bring that, bring the expensive lab-based motion capture systems and trying to create something that, yeah, every strength and conditioning coach across the country could use, at 1/1000th of the cost. So, if you look at an expensive motion capture Vicon system, those are going to be 150, $200,000. Like the Microsoft motion sensor is like 150, $200, and then you need a tripod and a laptop, and that's all you need. And so, then that's really the whole goal with a lot of what our work is to take those, kind of literature kind of validated lab-based tests and see if we can translate that to something that, you can just, yeah, literally just pop up within, 5 minutes and you've got your setup right there. And I think your idea is like really great. I mean, because, we're just trying to build this tool that way, build a tool where people can actually measure dynamic movement. I mean, because, now you've got your biodex and, your things where you can measure, but there's really not any good ways to kind of accurately measure dynamic movement, across different schools, and then because you need to be able to measure it, and then everybody can do their own thing and they can show, hey, look at this, we're doing this, and, our athletes are now measuring this, and they started here, and talking about the different risk factors for kind of other injuries. I mean, I'm a believer that, when you think about those athletes, especially female athletes that show a lot of dynamic knee valgus whenever they land off a drop vertical jump, I think that's kind of a continuum from patellofemoral pain onto patellar dislocators, and then onto ACL tears. And so I think that, too, I mean, this would be applicable to, I mean, I would love to, do this in the future with, a lot of like long distance running teams, and see if we can find this correlation between, those that are, because I mean, it's hard, it's hard to do manual muscle testing and really say, oh, look, your hip, for an athlete, your hip abductors are weak. I mean, they all, I mean, it's just hard to tease that out. And we're really more concerned about this dynamic movement because when we say dynamic knee valgus, and this is an important point, I mean, it's actually not true knee valgus. It is much more hip internal rotation is what's going on. Because when we say dynamic knee valgus, we're really thinking about it if you're looking at somebody from the front, so kind of just in a 2D plane about what you see. And really that knee that knee is not moving in varus and valgus itself. It's actually the hips that are internally rotating, and that's where the problem is.
Yeah, and carrying this into the next topic that we wanted to get into, this would be a great way to increase communication and involvement across, the plane between the weight room and sports medicine.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that, I mean, I think that communication from strength and conditioning to athletic training, to the physician is really one of those critical elements that unfortunately in a lot of our college, athletic settings is kind of missing. And too often we have where it almost feels like medicine has its own turf that they want to kind of defend, and strength and conditioning has its own turf. But I think that for really to for our athletes to succeed, we all have to like work together. And so I really, I talk to people. I think about if we have athletes that are very healthy, but they're not strong and they're not quick, like they're going to be terrible. If we have athletes that are the strongest and the fastest, but they're getting injured every other week, they're going to be terrible. So both of those things we have to have strong, fast, quick athletes that stay healthy. And so if either one of those things fall through the cracks, then neither of us have achieved anything. And so I really hope that we can, my dream kind of a setup is that, once a week you would have strength and conditioning coach, athletic trainer, team physician, all sitting down together, talking about athletes, that have injuries, athletes that they're concerned about, so everybody can be, kind of staying in the loop. And part of the reason I think that it's so critical, those 3 points, those three professions to meet together, is that we all have our own literature, and there's no way that I as a physician can know like your strength and conditioning literature cold and know athletic training literature. Like it's hard enough to stay up with my medical literature. And like as a strength and conditioning coach, like there's no way that you can like stay up to date on all the sports medicine like journals. And so I think even for that reason, the one example that I think of that is one of my favorite studies that's ever done was a study that was done in Scandinavia, I think in Norway, where it looked at hamstring injuries in professional soccer players. And they had the simple intervention of eccentric hamstring curls, which they call the Norwegian hamstring curls. And they just did that in a program, and it showed huge reductions of new and especially recurrent hamstring injuries. I think if I remember off the top of my head, the number needed to treat to prevent a recurrent hamstring injury was like 3 athletes, and it decreased them by 80% or more. And so that's a great example. Like I can see that in my medical literature, and I'm like, oh, like this is huge, this is important, but like I'm not out there working with the athletes, in the weight room or before games. And so, I can read that, but the only way I can make that happen is by working with my athletic trainer, my strength and conditioning coach. And it's probably the same way on things that you guys see in your literature that's like, this is actually more of the physician side. So,
Oh, no doubt, man. 100% with that. And then even more so, like understanding where we may come across something that is like X, Y, and Z in the rehabilitation realm or whatever it may be, but what if it doesn't fit with what you're doing right now? Or what if it doesn't fit with the time or the place or the readiness of the athlete? If they're not. So, for example, like the Nordic hamstring curls um, are getting a lot of attention, especially of late, because of new technology that's been developed where they can measure them and do all of these really cool things. But as awesome as those are you going to take a kid who probably couldn't even do a leg curl with a Swiss ball and say, now we need you to do a 3 to 5 second eccentric with your hips in line, knee to shoulder, and like you're going to paralyze the kid. Like they're not going to be able to do anything. And it's where those things I think are very important. I think that what we were talking about earlier, something. Now, how high is the drop that you're talking about for the test you run?
so it's a 12 inches to 31 centimeters.
Right. Okay. So I mean, it's just a rep, basically.
Yeah, so we try to get three like
Okay.
accurate measurements, and so any kid, so yeah, it's dropping off, 12 inches onto the ground and jumping as high as you can, and so there's never been any reported injuries, with that, and it's
Right.
not like a super intense thing, which is nice.
Yeah.
True.
But it's even then. So a 12-inch depth jump. Okay. Is that something that they need to be prepared for? Of course. Like all the literature. I mean, when you go back to Verkhoshansky, there's requirements and this, that, and the other thing. But to do that as an evaluation, it could even prove more that it's when they have these general abilities, these general strengths overall, um, does that show up in these tests? And now, even more so, prove what we're trying to get to. Like what Dr. Mann and I talk about all the time is the two things that always come up are how strong is strong enough and what's the progression. So how can we go? Because we both have been talking a lot now and starting with one set with athletes because there's only so much that they need to get better, right? And if you do too much, then guys like you are really, you're just too busy. So let's let you sleep in so that you don't have to worry about this. Let's dose them as little as necessary early on and build them and build them and build them. And then find what's the necessity for general strength before we start looking at special strengths, whether it be, you know, patterning specific based on, well, we're at these plateaus where we know this should take care of X, Y, and Z, but maybe it's only taking care of X, so let's start looking at Y and Z. And then bringing a test like that in to allow, at least, because unfortunately, not every institution has a physician in-house. So at least it can bring your ATC, or, as lucky as I am, I work with our director of rehabilitation. Like, he oversees men's basketball, and he's a stud. And it's everything we do. It's like, so where are we going with this cat or that cat or the other thing? So I think that these tests that can drive programming so that even though we're still kind of in our silos, we're still working together to move all the grain to the top of the till. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I think that one kind of also additional thing to that I think was important for that kind of team based approach is accurately recording and measuring injuries or even like limitations that occur, and then at the end of the season going back and looking at it as a team. Because I think that what can happen sometimes is that people can put interventions in, or things can go, and then at the end of the season, if you're not accurately recording time loss or even just slightly limited injuries along the way, then you don't really know, hey, did this work? Was this just like a random variance that we had a couple ACL injuries and like there was no way to prevent it? Or wait, when we look back, we've had more hamstring injuries than we probably should have over the last few years. Like, what are we doing differently? And so I think that's another kind of piece to that team-based approach that's really critical.
Oh, 100%. And it has to be communicated across both lines, because if it's
Hmm.
not, because what if it's just the fact that, like, say you're having these kids do some sort of, it's not a word, but like prehab in
Hmm.
in the athletic training room, but they're also doing 4 or 5 exercises similar in the weight room. Is it a sense where it's addition by subtraction? You need to take things away, and the reason these injuries are occurring are because of too much stuff. It's like a week or two ago, Derek Hansen brought up the fact that there's hamstring injuries in the NBA now. Like, it's 30 yards, and it's not like a flying 30. Like, you shouldn't be hitting max velocities. Like, how are you popping hammies if you're not really extending out and sprinting? So is it a fatigue thing that we need to start monitoring more and being better with? Is it is it something that the sport coach now needs to get involved in because of volumes and intensities at practice, or is it something that we can supplement by taking things away from one and putting them somewhere else? And it's I think things like that. That's what's fun to me, is figuring out where we need and where we don't, and where's the gas pedal and the clutch. But yeah, but I'm lucky. I've got a guy down the hall who I'll see here in 15, 20 minutes, and that'll be the conversation. So this morning, what did we see? Okay. What are they telling you? Okay. What are the numbers telling us? What are whatever readings we're taking telling us? So let's establish where we're going. And it's neat. It's nerdy, but it's neat.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that it's kind of cool too, as technology is allowing us to measure things easier, with GPS monitors, with that, I haven't seen one in person, but I've seen it online, the Nord board that measures the strength of the Nordic curls, the stuff that we're working on. I think it's going to be interesting because we're going to have a lot more measurements of stuff, but, you know, measurements without any kind of context, you don't know what to do with it, doesn't, give you anything. And so I think that's too what, having, really somebody who is, pretty much, I think that, you need like a sports scientist, basically, somebody who understands a lot of this on all staffs, who can help translate that for everybody else. So as you're getting all this this data, like what do you do with it? I really think that, I mean, you see a lot of, I mean, you see most professional teams now who will have, sports analysts, people that can, really in databases can get all this information together. It's kind of surprises me that we haven't seen that really start to like spread out on in the university and the NCAA level. I think that that's something that kind of cutting edge programs are going to realize that wow, like that actually doesn't cost them much to to hire a few people that are programmers that are analysts like that to start to do and to look at performance, to look at injuries. I think there's a lot of potential for that too.
Oh, 100%. And like I have to do that as a coach. So now you're taking away time and effort from doing these other things. You would have to do that as a physician when you could be doing other things within your profession that are actually what your job is.
Hmm.
So I couldn't agree more with that. I do think that that is stuff, especially being the guy who's been looking at readiness data, heart rate data, questionnaire data, and looking at 40 metrics, 50 metrics, and it's like trying to wrap your head around it, and then it's like, oh man, I got to go run a group. It's like,
Absolutely.
it'll sit you, it'll sit you down and start you spinning a little bit, but being able to separate things and start looking at trends and what's the norm out of the norm for each kid is what's really important with a lot of it. And it's, yeah, having someone just doing that and then communicating what's necessary it's priceless. I mean, it's
Hmm.
priceless. So it's,
I think it's just like it's like leveraging people to the top of their talents and not having you do something that someone else who's going to be able to do it better and faster than you can do it. Where like you and I could look at something and make some nasty Excel spreadsheet. It takes us a while, or you could have somebody else who like this is what they do and they're good at it, who can just like spit out like good reports.
oh yeah, or they're using like something different instead of Excel that actually like gives them what they're supposed to look at. Is
Hmm.
pivot tables are nice and all, but it might not give me exactly what I need. So let's talk about what the future holds then. So where is your research going now?
Yeah, so we have a couple months ago we applied for an R01 NIH grant to get over $1 million of funding to really kind of inject a lot of life into this project over the next 4 years, and that would we really need some funding to kind of pay for the biggest thing is like for developers, so computer engineering students and faculty to be able to work on developing some more of these algorithms. So we really like to build out other type of jumps and kind of lands and cutting maneuvers to kind of get more of a comprehensive approach. We've Tim Hewitt has agreed to be a consultant on our project, and so we're pretty excited about that. So that's kind of really the next, where the next steps are with this, and then just talking to other people about it and trying to get other people interested in it. We'd love to. Some people are interested in it. Maybe get out some of our kind of test systems. Just to have people kind of look at our one test, our one measurement that we've built out to get feedback. As we go forward, and hopefully, my goal with this is really to everything that we do with this, we validate it in the lab. So we hook it up, we hook a Vicon system up, and then we hook the Connect up, and we make sure that what we're measuring is accurate against the gold standard. And then we take it out into the field. And so, I think that right now we're working toward as a kind of a research direction, with this, because I don't want to ever have some product that I am not like 100% confident that it accurately measures things. I think that's something that we all are kind of cautious of in this kind of the sports science industry. As you can get cool things and you're like, well, what's this based on? And like you can never really find answers. And so I want this to be something that we've published things on it, and that if we ever get, hopefully someday we'll get to where there's a product that people can easily access. That users can be confident, like, okay, this is based on good science, and I know that these numbers I'm getting, that these are accurate compared to the gold standard.
That's awesome. So it's just expanding on the depth jump test and moving forward and trying to bring that to coaches.
Yeah, I mean, I really, the awesome thing is, I mean, there's potential to have, yeah, a system, available for, if you have your own laptop with a few $100, you can have the equipment, and the software where you could start testing your athletes and retesting and trying different things. And so that's really what the goal is to bring bring motion kind of analysis and motion capture kind of to the masses.
No, that's fantastic. So then after you get through your test and you start your interventions, what other sort of evaluations do you recommend when it would come to this topic? Like a lot of people love to talk about return to play. And I think that my issue with return to play is that it's always based off like left versus right. So if we were to sit here and say, when we have a student athlete come in and we want to get baseline measures so we know when they actually are back, quotes, are back and able to get to 95% or whatever the baseline number is now in the literature for return to play, what tests would you, other than this, which obviously is important to identify that there could be a problem, but like the hop stop or things like that, like what do you look at and say, these are important to have when it comes to return to play and rehab?
Yeah. We're kind of in a dual track with this kind of injury prevention stuff is where it's natural that the application too is for return to play. And so we're kind of, working on that as well. So things that we're looking at here is also looking at the modified start excursion balance test. Also known, some people would call it the the Y balance test,
Mm-hmm.
as a good measure. And I think you bring up a really good point, like just comparing to the opposite side of someone whose biomechanics are horrible to start with, and that's why they tore their ACL. Like that's not going to do us any, that's gonna not going to do us any good because they moved terrible on their left, even though they tore their right. Like, we don't want it to be 95% of the other side. Like it's going to need to be about 120% of the other side. So I think that with that kind of having, you're almost going to have to develop, we need to do better about developing norms, kind of expected norms for different age athletes, different sports athletes, different positions possibly. And so start excursion balance test is one. We look at a lot of kind of like single leg balance, so kind of dropping off and landing on a single leg. And I'm a big believer in hamstring strength. And if you look at some of the ACL literature, I think historically a lot of people would talk about, and make sure their quads are strong. Well, if you look at female athletes, if they're, most of the time the problem is that they're quad dominant. And if you're quad dominant, you can't land softly. You're going to land with a hard leg. And so trying to get our female athletes really to fire their hamstrings is a really important thing. We look at hip abductor, hip external rotation strength. So those are some of the, and then always, I think core strength is a really hard thing to measure, kind of consistently. But working as much as we can on the core is something we value too.
No, that's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic because I couldn't agree more that we always like to say, it's, well, if they can, do the hop stop and it's 95% of their right leg or their single leg press or whatever it may be is 95%, then they're ready for the next thing. But what if their 95% of their left leg isn't 95% of what their left leg was before they got hurt? So,
Mm-hmm.
it's not actually 95%. It's actually like 87%. So are we ready to move on or not? And then I think the other thing that just from the performance side that I see as super important that I think all of us overlook is just the technique of movement and how that re-education needs to be part of, the education initially needs to be a bigger part of what we do in the weight room. And what I mean by that is, how do you actually cut? Like how do you come up and put and go? Like we worry so much about like, oh, you can only break as, you can only run as fast as you can stop. And it's like, well, you're not going to run faster than you can't stop because your body's going to tell you you can't run that fast because you can't stop.
Mm-hmm.
Like your body's not stupid. It doesn't want to die. It's not going to be like, oh, keep running faster so that Forrest Gump didn't slow down because there was a tunnel. If the wall was there, Forrest Gump would have slowed down. But we don't teach how to pop off the ground and how to be elastic and how to move. And it's not just in rehab. I don't think we do it enough as coaches. And I think that that's another thing too that I would be very interested in, and it's to see where that could fit and how that could be more assistive in these situations, because it's great if you can jump and land and stop. But if you're a soccer player or a basketball player and you jump and land and stop, well, they're going the other way. You
Hmm.
know, can you and go? Can you put your foot in the ground and cut without leaving your hip behind you and dropping your knee in? Can you lead with your pelvis and get your body moving? And it's, a lot of that comes straight from Dr. Yes's. Um, but yeah, I think that that's kind of like the next step with all of it in intermingling what we do together as well.
Yeah, I think that yeah, I completely agree. I think that the challenge with one of that is like if we, if we're trying to change movement patterns of athletes in high school or college, is it too late? Like I mean, really, the ideal I think is, what we see. What it's been shown. Kevin Ford has done some research on this, where looking at on the drop vertical jump, looking at movement patterns of males and females as they kind of go through puberty, and it's kind of crazy is that the males kind of they look kind of about the same as they kind of gain that muscle kind of strength burst through puberty, and girls they really kind of drop off as far as they're like or they increase their knee valgus, and they get weak of the hips, and so I mean I think that ideally it would be getting kids like start when they're 12 years old, and as you're really showing kids, trying to train their movement patterns as they're relearning their body as they're going through puberty. Because I do, I do worry that, I mean, for some athletes, like, by the time they get to, even like their upperclassmen years of high school or college, is it too late? Are these, I mean, we can try to do some things, but is this muscle, motor memory? Is it just like too entrenched? These poor movement patterns. I don't know. I mean, I don't know on that, but it's something I kind of worry about.
Oh, no doubt. It's always easier to learn to do it the right way than to have to learn it over again.
Very true.
Yeah. But no, Dr. Gray, this has been absolutely fantastic. I can't thank you enough for spending the time with us today. Um, how can people find you, social media, see what's going on with everything you're doing?
Yeah. On Twitter, I'm at Mizzou Sports Doc. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me for those on Twitter. And if people have questions, you're always welcome to email me too. My email is Grayyad, A as in apple, D as in dog, at missouri.edu.
Awesome, man. Well, I thank you so much for spending the time. This is fantastic. We will be in touch real soon.
All right. Take care, Jay.
Yep, thanks. And a huge thank you to today's guest, University of Missouri's Dr. Aaron Gray. Guys, I mean, bringing all of these things together and incorporating it to now evaluate and look at the risk factors that we may have when we're dealing with these student athletes is absolutely fantastic. And then tying it into what we already know, right? We know the 1.5 times body weight idea when it comes to depth jumps. Now we can even look at it with these kids and say, is that actually what we need? When we get there, are they actually ready, or are there other qualities that we need to develop within them as well? And it's really awesome. I can't thank Dr. Gray enough for taking the time. I'm really excited to see where this project continues to go, because it does sound like something that's quick, it's inexpensive, and it sounds really effective in allowing us to understand what we could do to help assist the athlete. And again, I got to thank Dr. Mann for setting this up. And again, guys, I really hope you enjoyed the talk as much as I did. And if you did, please share it in the social media outlet of your choice. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, leave them below. I'll shoot them right over to Dr. Gray. You can hit him up on Twitter. He's always open to talking, guys, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I hope this helped you out. And guys, thank you again for being part of what we're doing here at Central Virginia Sport Performance. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.